The 11%, that's the percentage of CEOs which are women in Silicon Valley. Within this 11% was one woman, Elizabeth Holmes, a woman of deception who committed multiple fraud crimes, but also paid the price with 11 years in prison. Welcome to the first episode of our podcast, The 11%. Hi, I'm Dig.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Irene, and we'll be your host for this season of The 11%.
Thanks for joining us on the first episode. Make sure to check out our website, the11%.wordpress.com, or social media at the 11% podcast for more information and updates on the podcast.
All right, so for those of you who have just joined us in the 11%, we'll be talking about the media biases and their influence on others. For this season, we'll be focusing on one person, Elizabeth Holmes, who is the founder of the former healthcare company Theranos. We will be explaining her rise to fame as well as the media's contribution to her meteoric rise, despite mounting evidence of her company's fraudulent practices.
So throughout our journey of starting this podcast, we've spoken to many people about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, and many of them did not know about her story, so we thought we'd start with a brief introduction. Elizabeth Holmes was born on February 3rd, 1984 in Washington, D.C. Her parents were no doubt well off. Her mother, Noelle Ann Doust, works as a congressional committee staffer, while her father, Christian Rasmuth Holmes IV, worked as a vice president at Enron, which would infamously declare bankruptcy in 2001.
At a young age, she moved to Houston, where she would attend St. John's School. At St. John's, she showed exceptional intelligence and passion for science. After graduating, she attended Stanford, where she studied chemical engineering. She was also a student researcher and a laboratory assistant, so obviously she already had an image of being a very smart, capable person.
With that one out of the way, let's talk about Theranos.
All right.
So made in 2003, Theranos, originally named Real-Time Cures, was funded by Elizabeth Holmes herself, using her college fund, though soon after the company's creation, she began to look for investors.
Essentially, her company was working towards creating this blood testing machine that could run a bunch of tests and diagnose people with whatever health problems they could have had. This would provide faster, more affordable, and more accessible blood testing, which was a revolutionary idea for the healthcare industry. That is, if it actually worked.
Yeah, the reality of Theranos was a lot different than this. According to a bunch of former Theranos employees, the company was pretty much a huge mess, and they weren't even close to achieving what they had promised.
Looking at the full story now, it seems obvious to me that Theranos was a pretty suspicious company. So how exactly was she able to get away with all that in the first place? How was she able to dupe billionaires and investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars?
Well, if you look at video clips of Holmes introducing her company, you can tell she possessed a unique combination of charisma, conviction, and such a strong vision that I think definitely played a role in attracting investors to Theranos.
Yeah, she also used her networking and connections from Stanford University to gain access to influential figures in the business and healthcare communities.
She used her connections from Stanford, but she also had a lot of family connections, one of them being her father, as he worked in high-level positions at various government agencies and had ties to her many influential individuals. She was able to gain an even bigger pool of possible investors.
Also, as Kyle kind of mentioned before, she had a very specific image that she portrayed. One thing you will hear us talk about fairly often in our podcast is gender bias, because when it comes to the tech world, it's obviously a very male-dominated industry, and Holmes definitely knew this.
Being a woman, was she treated harsher than other fraudsters, convicted fraudsters who have been male? I would have to look at it. I wouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately, women still face bias in that, just being successful is hard enough.
That was Julia Foy. She's a faculty member of the BCIT Broadcast and Online Journalism program, who we interviewed on questions regarding gender biases in the media.
People often emphasize her fashion choices since she was known for the black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs. Not only that, but you may have noticed her very deep baritone voice, which turns out to be fake.
Sure. Yeah. Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure. And we talked to our lab team, and they said, okay, you can do the draw. And so they did this, what would have been a finger stick on this little nub on his arm.
So her taking fashion inspiration from a famous tech guy and deepening her voice in a way that's characteristic to a guy was her strategy of getting people to take her seriously as a woman in the industry. So that's what I mean when I say she created this image of herself that she portrayed not only to investors, but the media as well. And that combined with the fact that she presented her company as this revolutionary healthcare technology is why investors were so drawn to Theranos.
Not only that, but I feel like the timing of Theranos' beginning also made a big difference on their initial success. Since around that time in the early 2000s, people were really looking for innovation in the healthcare industry. And Theranos' proposition aligned perfectly with the growing demand for healthcare solutions that were both convenient and cost-effective. Plus, the allure of being a cutting-edge Silicon Valley startup, combined with the potential for substantial financial returns, made Theranos an enticing investment opportunity for many.
We've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood that could be taken from a finger.
Yeah, for sure. Her connections, the image she created for herself, and the general timing of Theranos' creation were all factors that played a role in the initial success of Holmes' company when it comes to the investors. Now we have an idea of how she gained all these investments, but what about when it comes to her popularity from the media?
And that, everyone, is what you'll find out in the next episode of The 11%. So make sure you join us next week. Thank you for listening and for all the support so far. Once again, be sure to check out our websites, the11percentpodcast.wordpress.com, and follow us on our Instagram and Twitter at The 11% Podcast for more information and updates on our podcast. See you next week.